Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Idiosyncratic Fables, a part of Wilderness Fire Productions, where we are cultivating the passion for books, audiobooks, and overall storytelling. Since time first began, we have all been storytellers. Everybody has a story to tell, and I want to hear yours. I'm your host, James, and today I'm thrilled to welcome a true powerhouse in the progression fantasy and lit RPG world, the author of the best-selling 1,000 Lee series, The System Apocalypse, and many more. A Canadian writer with Malaysian roots, he's gone from publishing his first book on a whim in 2017 to landing major traditional hardcover deals with Ace Books in 2026. Known for grounded heroes, authentic cultivation worlds, and compelling characters who actually have to work for their power-ups. Please welcome to the show, Tao Wong. Tao, good sir, thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show today.
Thank you very much for having me here, James. And that was an incredible introduction.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So can you start us off by telling us a bit about your journey from Malaysia to Canada and how your background influences your writing?
Oh, God. I first moved to Canada over 20 plus years ago now, early 2003, I think, 2004, somewhere around there. I moved into Vancouver, actually, from Malaysia. And that was after working in Malaysia for a few years. I think a lot of the background, some of it comes true in works like Climbing the Ranks, where it's a very Malaysian-centered urban fantasy LitRPG that I work with, where I want to bring a little bit of the world that I, knew in there. But I also, I try to be authentic with the things like my cultivation works, 1,000 Lee, and the likes. Growing up in an Asian country gives me, I think, a slightly different view on things, especially when I think a lot of the cultivation works that you see from China itself are different, actually, in some ways, from the kind of culture and world that I grew up in Malaysia. I'm kind of diaspora, right? I'm third generation diaspora in Malaysia, first generation in Canada. And so it's strange being diaspora. You're both really in tune with aspects of your culture, and also other aspects just disappear.
Sure.
And so then there's a lot of research and study going back into, what did we used to do, or what has changed? And then, of course, on top of that, China itself has changed very much. They went through its old communist phase. And so a lot of the old traditions that the diaspora carried with them have faded too, and been altered for different, all of that, growing up in different cultures, understanding the nuances of them, kind of reflect a little in my work.
Outstanding. Now, you went from, or correction, you became a full-time author in 2019 after starting in 2017 with A Healer's Gift. What surprised you most about the transition to writing professionally?
That's an interesting question. I think for me, the greatest alteration for me when I went full-time was how little additional words was being put down. You hit a certain point, or I hit a certain point, where pushing further for more words doesn't really work. I can hit 2,000 words a day, 3,000. And then if I start trying to push for like 5 to 7 every day, I might be able to do that for a few days, but often I end up in what I call a creative hangover the next day.
Yeah.
And I just can't. That's the next few days is a real struggle. And so I've realized that being very steady with my output is much more preferable and productive than trying to push. I know others are different in that but that's what works for me.
And it's also not sustainable in the long run if you try to push for that 5,000 to 7,000 word count.
Yeah, I don't think there's many people who can do that for very long. And even if you do it for like 4 or 5 years, I think even Pirate Abba, who's well known in our circles for producing ridiculous amounts of words, has cut back on their word counts. Now, it's still much higher than what I would put out per week, but they have, found that they've needed to refill the well, as the saying goes.
Now, you're also known for blending authentic cultural elements into your stories, like you mentioned earlier. How would you say your Malaysian Chinese heritage and experiences shape the worlds you build?
I think, well, first thing would be food. I mean, talk to any and we all end up being giant foodies. It's just, there's so much good food in Malaysia, and I think because of the blending of cultures between Indian, Malay, Chinese, and of course the British who ruled us for a number of years, you've got this amazing variety of food and what's basically fusion food after a few hundreds of years of that blending. So food really shows up a lot in my work. I also think a lot of cultures, Asian cultures, even the South of the US, food is such a important aspect of working with individuals that to me, it's all important to have in there. But outside of that, I think navigating through cultures, navigating through political landscapes that don't necessarily place you as, the main the main character, if you will,
right,
is it's something that you learn and you pay attention to and you notice, and I think that gives you an outsider viewpoint that allows you to at least to me, to write about different cultures, different varieties, especially when you're doing fantasy. But I try to bring aspects of that, the outsiders, into my work too. Whether that's, for example, in Thousand Li, we have some, Yukun is a clan member from a smaller clan that isn't, basically Han Chinese. So I brought him in purposely because I wanted to showcase a different kind of culture and different things. But yeah.
I like that a lot, and it's really beneficial too, to introduce an element such to a degree of simplicity as food, because in the worlds of fantasy, sci-fi, what have you, just general make believe, it's kind of hard for readers to grasp onto unless they have some form of relatability. And you're speaking straight to my heart, Tao. I love food. Grew up in the South, actually, all my life before I went to the military. So I'm very fond of Southern cooking, Cajun cooking, and good old-fashioned Texas barbecue.
I really enjoy barbecue.
Oh, yeah. Now, you mentioned 1,000 Li, which is actually the next set of questions I've got for you. So let's dive into that series and unpack it for a bit. For listeners new to your work, can you give a spoiler-free overview of 1,000 Li series and what makes it stand out in the progression fantasy space?
Sure. The 1,000 Li series is basically the protagonist, Long Wu Ying's journey to immortality. It's a 12-book completed series, as you've mentioned. It's been released by Ace Books in hardcovers again this year. The first 2 books have come out already, The First Step and The First Stop, and The First War comes out in November. And it's written in 3-book arcs, and it basically follows Wu Ying as a farmer as he learns and studies how to become an immortal. A lot of it focuses on the process, which is aided by understanding the Tao. So there's a lot of aspects of Taoism within the work itself, as well as my enduring interest of martial arts. So there's a lot of fight scenes in there. There's a lot of political aspects, as we've talked about, culture, and to some extent, some found friends and people who join him along his journey.
Outstanding. Now, why would you say you chose Wu Ying to start as a peasant farmer rather than a chosen one prodigy, for example?
It actually comes down to a lot of, and to go back to answer a bit more of your question previously, it goes back to a lot of the tropes within traditional wuxia, which is what a lot of the Xianxia works draw their base tropes from. And I'm talking about traditional in the sense of Jin Yong and Gurong, their works in the 1940s to the 1960s, basically 1970s period.
Right.
So the new wuxia works, not traditional ancient ones.
Gotcha.
But a lot of it involves a conflict between loyalties, between family and your sect or your martial arts school, between and in specifically with Wu Ying and your question, it's specifically between the prodigy and the hard worker. And it's an ongoing, it's almost a cultural discussion between who's better, right? And you can see that in other Asian cultures. Naruto is a great example of that. You've got Sasuke, who's the prodigy, who, everything comes to him amazingly. And then you've got Naruto on the opposite side, who, messes up and makes problems and has issues. And his way of solving his problems is to work harder. And it's just it's almost a cultural conversation that goes on about it. Generally speaking, it's the underdog, the hard worker that is favored, but not always.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that the entire series is being published now in hardcover by Ace Books. How excited are you for this process, that the traditional publishing milestone is now at your doorstep?
It's really exciting. I can't really explain or describe it. It's fascinating to go through the process,
Sure.
how it's all done on the back end, but also just to receive the physical books, because I don't know if you've seen them, but they've done an amazing job on the books itself. They created new artwork, they created a map for us, they created chapter headers, and just the plain formatting is beautiful. It's such a difference, actually, and it made me realize how much we've kind of let down our own formatting compared to what traditional publishing does, which means that, all our books going forwards have been much nicer looking because we put in much more effort into it. But it's also really exciting just to see it in bookstores everywhere. To go into a bookstore and realize that there's a good chance that your book might be in there for you to sign and, for readers to pick up.
That's awesome. What would you say is one thing you're most proud of in the Thousand Li series?
Oh, how much of the Taoism I've managed to sneak into it. It's Taoism as a philosophy is something that I've been dabbling in over the years, as aspects of it that I find fascinating and quite useful for everyday life. And so introducing it as, mini stories or as thematic elements in the books are probably the thing that I find most interesting. And I've heard from some readers that they found the books, it's made them think. And that's, I think, the biggest and most important aspect of anything that we write. It's to open up the eyes of readers and just let them think.
Would you say that was also one of the most challenging aspects with the Thousand Li series?
Oh, God, yes. So one of the aspects about Taoism some degree, and that even practicing it, is that there is a degree of almost laissez-faire aspect to the world, or an individual's interactions with it. It's the sage is more meant to be going about his life and living his life as an example of the Tao, rather than going out and teaching it. So you've got, in Confucianism, for example, Confucius is always having his schools and his classes and everything, and he's going out of the way. Whereas your typical Taoist master is more likely to run away and hide in the mountains rather than take on a student. And so that kind of laissez-faire attitude is very difficult to manage when you've got to have a storyline that progresses. You have to have a character who's actually active to some extent with the world around and with the plot. And so that was always a bit of a balancing act in how true I could be to both Taoism as well as to the characters and what you're learning.
Gotcha. Because I hearing you say that kind of makes me think of actually one things we learned in one of the panels at LitRPG Con is you don't want to do too much info dumping. And so as much as, using your words, you're trying to, sneak that in and to weave it into your stories. At the same time, you don't want this huge torrential downpour of information and therefore lose the reader.
Yeah, I think that's it's one of those pieces of advice that is interesting to me, because while it's true in general, it's also wrong in specifics, right?
Right.
It's how you weave it. David Weber, for example, who writes the Honor Harrington series, info dumps like crazy, right? That's technical facts everywhere. There's details upon details of work in there. But his readers, including myself, love it, right? You could also look at how stats are used, or the skill sets in a lit RPG. We might do an option of like 4 different skills in there, and we explain it or describe the 4 skills inside the description as the AI comes out of whatever you're using. And then you have the character thinking about how to do it. And all of that to a traditional editor might look like info dumping. But for our readers, the RPG readers, that's not info dumping. That's actually showing us the thought processes, the world. It's world building, and it's what they are here for, right? They want to imagine all of these skills. They want to play with it in their minds and go, oh, maybe I could grab that, or maybe that skill with this skill that previously could work out.
Right.
So I think it's a dangerous commentary, I think, or suggestion, because you have to be careful on how you apply it.
That makes sense. You also wrote the System Apocalypse LitRPG series and others like Adventures on Brad, Hidden Wishes, etc. How do you switch between different subgenres, and what draws you to each one?
I'm a little bit of a chaos demon. It's the way my brain works. But I get bored after a while, and so having 2 to 3 different projects running at any one time actually helps. I think for me, having a very strong protagonist that lives in my brain, or a series of characters, helps anchor me into those worlds, and allows me to switch between them much easier. Like John's probably the strongest voice I've ever written. Like, he knows what he's doing and what he wants, and he's a bit of a ass, but he comes true. And when I start writing him, it's very clear what he wants. But for me, switching as a writer, switching genres or looking at genres, it's all about the story that I want to tell. Sometimes it might be just a spark of an idea, and then I'll write a few chapters to see if it's something that I actually really want to explore fully in a full story. Sometimes I do know both the beginning and the end already, and it's a thematic element that only that specific subgenre will fit, I guess. And so it just depends on what I'm trying to do.
Gotcha. Now, within that chaotic mindset that you brilliantly described, how would you say you balance the action, slice of life moments, character relationships, and progression?
Oof. Truthfully, I don't.
Ah,
I don't. I don't actively try to balance it, especially when I'm writing. When I'm writing, it is very much a flow or try to hit flow state and doing whatever feels right at that time. There's a writer called Kristen Catherine Rouge who talks about the creative mind. And one of her points about it is that we've been telling stories, as you said in your introduction, since we were kids, right?
yeah.
All of us have been telling stories. We've been listening to stories when we were like 6 months old or whatever. When Hop on Pop is read to us or the like. So our creative mind is many, many years ahead of our critical mind, the one that goes, oh, this is not how a story should be. But we've been listening and we've been watching stories for so long that we know the rhythm. If we're willing to let our brains step away, we know the rhythm of what a story should be. We know when something feels boring to us. And I think that's the biggest critique is once I've written my first draft, when I'm going back in and editing it, if I'm bored in a spot, I know that's a problem. And that's where I need to fix it. And that's when, the critical mind will be working on it and going, oh, this is why it's wrong, or what this is the problem. But I don't do any of that while I'm writing. I leave it alone until then. And I would say about 80-90% of the time, most of what I need to fix is most of the work is there. It just needs to be polished.
I gotcha. So, what does your writing routine look like these days? Do you outline heavily or do you discover the story as you go?
I call myself a planter. I generally know what my beginning is, I know what my end is, and I know what my beginning for each book, and also the beginning and end for each arc, and the beginning and end for each series. I try to make sure that I know what my series ends are in particular, and for the books, because otherwise I find I wonder too much, and that's when I get in too much writing and rewriting aspects because I don't know what I'm trying to do.
Gotcha.
Which sometimes works, but it mostly just means rewriting a lot. And so if I know what my beginning and end is, I generally then have vague ideas of the tentpole moments that need to happen. And then I just write.
Fantastic. You share a lot of publishing business insights on your blog when I was doing my research. What are some of the biggest lessons you've learned about marketing, negotiations, or building a sustainable career as an author?
That's a big question. I think the first one is to be adaptable. Everything changes. Like in the nearly 10 years that I've been publishing, the landscape has changed over and over again. Right now, the audiobook landscape is changing heavily. And what's happening with Audible and ACX and Spotify is changing both how much money people are making as well as what we could potentially make in the future. And so understanding that and paying attention to that and then being able and willing to adapt to it. When I started back in 2017, Royal Road was a very different beast from what it is now, right?
I bet so.
There were so much fewer of us on there that any book that you threw up could easily be found by readers. Now, if you're not doing shout outs, if you're not, partaking in the game for the algorithm, you're nowhere. So it's a different thing entirely. And there's so many aspects of things within our genre and outside that have changed. So being adaptable and not being stuck to one specific thing is a major aspect, I would say. Understanding copyright, understanding what copyright actually means, and what can and cannot be copyrighted, and what your copyright can be used for or how it is split is very important, I think. Especially now that LitRPG is becoming so much more prevalent. Like A Thousand Lee, as an example, has its copyright split multiple times now. We've got print copyright. We've got special editions, which is another part of the slice. We have audiobook, which is another part of the slice. We've got ebooks, which is another part of the slice.
Oh, wow.
You've got discussions of merchandise, right? Web comics or web novels. All of these things that come from your same IP, but they are all different slices of it. And so understanding copyright, understanding how you can use that to make you the most money is a huge thing. Foreign rights translations is another one, right? Copyright between one country to the next can also be a big thing. If you don't understand how all that functions and what is used for, you can potentially give up a lot more than you mean to. So I would say both of those things. As for negotiations, lean on people who know. I have learned a lot from people who have been in the industry for 20, 30, 40 years. I am always looking to learn from other people within their specializations. In LitRPG Con, we did a contracts panel, and I learned a lot from Jamie and James and Shani, John and Shani Stovall.
Yeah.
J.R. Matthews, sorry. But they were talking about things that they were looking at or the way that they view contracts that I had never really considered before. And so there's always something that you can learn.
I actually remember sitting in that exact panel, and both my wife and I took a bunch of notes. Well, my wife took the majority of the notes for that one. But yeah, listening to you and the Stovalls was incredibly valuable information. With success in both self-publishing via Kindle Unlimited, audio, etc., and now traditional deals, what advice would you give to aspiring authors trying to break in today?
I would say pick your lane to start. Self-publishing by itself is incredibly difficult to go and gain traction in. Not as bad in lit RPG or romantasy or cozy fantasy, I think, right now, but it's still difficult. There's a lot that you need to learn. And if you're not committed to learning that aspect, you're going to fail at it, or you're not going to have as much success as you could potentially be. It's the same with trad, right? If you do traditional publishing, even learning how to write a query letter, learning how to go and interact with agents, learning what the basic industry is like, whether you want to go after the big trad 5 or the smaller independent publishers out there, what that looks like, what the general benchmarks are for the contracts that they're going to give you, and what the limitations of working with them might look like are all very important. And just the ways that you can break in potentially from each of those will be different. And if you're trying to split yourself across both, I think personally, I believe that you would not do as well. So you're better off trying to pick a lane, get good at those, and then look at branching out from there.
Gotcha. How important have communities been to your career, such as readers, other authors, Patreon, that kind of thing? And what role do they play now?
I think they are always going to be very important, right? A lot of my best friends are authors these days because they're the only ones who understand this insane industry that we're in. It's both a really great industry to be in, but also can be very frustrating, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're reliant on giants who can squash us without thought and might squash us without thought because that's what they are. Um, and so there's a lot of uncertainty in this business and a lot of speculation. So the authors are make a big feature of it. The lit RPG audience by themselves have been incredibly tightly knit since the beginning, and the early Facebook groups that were created. The old lit RPG group, which is still existing, and then the lit RPG books and the game lit society, which has now transitioned to something else that I can't remember the term. But these were all very close knit groups where my books actually were mentioned even without me knowing about it early on, and they were the initial impetus of my success. So all of those and the readers that have continued to come out and purchase books and explore the various stories that I have to tell, they're always going to continue to be huge supporters, and I guess what's the term I'm looking for? I guess huge benefactors to me.
That makes sense. If a reader wants to start with one of your series, which one would you recommend first and why?
I always find that question very hard because every reader is different.
Of course.
And so, but I think I'm actually quite proud of the 1,000 Lee series. I think it has some of my better writing in it. I think I purposely wrote the 1,000 Lee series as a primer to cultivation works in general and to certain aspects of Chinese culture. So there's a lot of footnotes in it to help explain things like that. It also has some of the most fun fighting scenes and takes a lot of the knowledge that I've gained over the years over martial arts and actually translates it. Whereas some of my other characters aren't trained martial artists. And so while aspects of describing the fight scenes are necessary, are brought in, it's not the same.
Gotcha. What is a book, author, game, or show even that has influenced you the most as a writer?
Well, as an author, I would say Louis McMaster Bujold would probably be the author I look up to and I think has influenced some of my writing the most. She is one of the most crisp and pristine writers I know of. There are literal chunks of her books where I've sat down and did analysis of, and often I walk away from it going, I could not have written that, and I could not change a single word in this entire paragraph that would make it better. She's chosen exactly the right words to convey exactly what she wants. And that kind of writing is what I strive for.
That's awesome. So what's next up for you? Any upcoming releases, new series, or projects you're excited about?
Well, I think my next upcoming release would be my newest LitRPG project, which is the Dungeon Brawler series. The first book, Ares Academy, comes out later this year, and we're going to actually rapid release that. So I'm actually working on the third book right now and getting that ready for rapid release. But that's going to be a 5-book series that will just come out between the end of this year towards the end of next year, and should hopefully be all done, if not by soon after.
Fantastic. And then finally, last question for you. Where can listeners find your books, follow your work, and or support you best?
Okay. Well, you can find the 1,000 Lee series in most bookstores out there in North America. If you ask if they don't have it, I'm sure they can bring it in. Ace Books will be very happy if you do so, and so will I. Otherwise, you can go to my publishing website, starletpublishing.com, and purchase whatever wide books I have in there, especially physical books. Those are all signed by myself. And as you've mentioned, I have a personal blog as for me as a writer called mylifemytao.com. and so you can find me there too.
Perfect.
And there are links to all my socials inside all of those websites.
Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Tao, thank you so much for being on the show today. You've been a true delight just to sit and listen to your journey, your profession as a writer, and your passion as to why you write. I truly appreciate you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me on.
And thank you all for tuning into this episode. If you enjoyed it as much as I did, I ask that you please rate it and review it, and even subscribe to the channel wherever you get your podcasts, because it helps me to reach more storytellers just like you. You can also drop me a line on social media or even email directly to me who you would love to hear next, or even better, if you would love to be a guest on the show. I promise it's not as scary as it seems. Also, I host a Discord server where I showcase my behind-the-scenes work of audiobook and narration, and I invite you to click the link in the show notes because I would love to have you as a part of that community. And as always, everybody is worthy to be loved. Everybody is worthy to be heard. Everybody has a story to tell, and I want to hear yours. So until I talk to you next time, dear listener, peace be with you.